Did you know that Lewis Hamilton is almost out of Q3 in Canada, despite being one of its most successful circuits? What is happening with Ferrari and why the SF-25 is about to break the patience of a legend like Hamilton? Lewis Hamilton qualified 5th at the Canada 2025 Grand Prix, a position that may seem competitive and even decorous within Ferrari's current context. However, it is enough to examine the details with more attention to discover that this action is far from being a reflection of the expected performance. It is not simply to have stayed behind Russell, Verstappen and Piastri, it's about how and why it happened. Hamilton's time was 1:11,526, more than 6/10 slower than George Russell's pole position, which marked 1:10,899. This gap, apparently subtle, is actually the most obvious symptom of a chronic disease within SF-25, the lack of technical evolution and the inability to translate the potential of the car into stable performance. From the first day of activity on the track, the symptoms were in sight. During Friday's practice sessions, Hamilton was baffled with the erratic behavior of the car. The British words were clear: it will be a challenge to enter Q3 at this rhythm. It was not a comment when passing, but a technical warning disguised as diplomacy. And it is that the SF-25 was nervous in slow curves, particularly in Curve 2 in the final chicane, where the car did not offer traction and suffered from a subwiring that was manifested at the time of loading the front axle. Ferrari, once again, seemed to have reached the weekend without a really functional base configuration, forcing Hamilton to adapt in real time, a risky practice when you have as little margin on a track like Montreal. On Friday, the team tried to mitigate problems with adjustments in the distribution of brakes and the height of the car, without success. The rebound in the back when passing through the aggressive pianos of Montreal caused a sudden loss of adhesion that prevented Hamilton from attacking the curbs as it used to do it. That loss of trust was reflected in the intermediate sectors, where he lost time systematically against his most direct rivals. Saturday's classification was, therefore, more a testimony of Hamilton's ability and experience to maximize how little he had, than a reflection of a technical recovery by Ferrari. In short, this 5th place is not a result. It is a warning. It is a burning alarm that indicates that something fundamental is not working within SF-25. And the most worrying thing is that this something seems to have no immediate solution. If the first act reveals to us that Hamilton's 5th place was a facade, this second act unmasks the silent drama that is fought inside the SF-25 passenger compartment every weekend. Lewis Hamilton is not fighting only against his rivals on the track, but also against a much more insidious enemy, his own car. The SF-25 has become a technical and emotional challenge, a car that requires its pilot an extreme level of adaptation and at the same time, denies the basic tools to achieve it. The greatest obstacle is the lack of predictability. The car changes its behavior from one session to another and, what is worse, between a stint and the next. In one lap it may seem reasonably stable and in the next one becomes unpredictable, even with the same track and temperature conditions. This inconsistency not only prevents Hamilton from building trust, but forces him to constantly modify his driving style. He went from looking for the vertex gently to enter curves with more aggressiveness, then braked again before the ideal point, trying to minimize the sudden rear reactions. Each attempt to find a harmony between its piloting and the car was responded with a new contradiction by SF-25. Ferrari engineers, aware of the problem, have implemented numerous changes in configuration: brake balance settings, differential modifications, variations in front and rear height. But none has managed to eliminate that sense of disconnection that Hamilton describes as "dance with someone who has no rhythm." That phrase is not just an emotional expression, it is a technical statement. Describe the lack of linearity in car responses. In ideal conditions, a Formula One car should be an extension of the pilot. In the case of SF-25, that connection is broken. The chassis responds with delay, the rear traction is unpredictable and the front axle does not inform enough before losing grip. In addition, there is the emotional burden of having to rebuild your style. Lewis Hamilton has historically been an extremely intuitive pilot, based on sensations. In Mercedes, that intuition based on a predictable and logical platform. With Ferrari, he had to reconfigure. He is trying to replicate the Leclerc braking style, more based on maintaining a faster speed passage through a more pronounced lift and coast. However, doing so is not a guarantee of success, because what works for one does not necessarily work for another, especially when the car does not offer a stable base on which to build. The pressure does not only come from the results. It comes from the symbolic weight of having left Mercedes to embark on an emotional and technical adventure in Ferrari. Hamilton knew that the process would be complicated, but did not anticipate having to rewrite his way of driving from scratch. And that, together with the lack of visible progress within the team, begins to generate accumulated tension. It is not just about times per return. This is how every minute on the track has become an internal, silent battle, in which Hamilton fights to maintain control, not to overfile, not to be dragged by frustration. It is a war that is fought in his hands, his mind, and a steering wheel that does not respond with the clarity that he should. This disconnection not only affects the present, it also projects a shadow on the future. If Ferrari fails to offer you a more consistent and communicative car, the Hamilton integration process will be compromised in the long term. No matter how many poles or podiums Charles Leclerc. If the team cannot offer two equally efficient cars, it is wasting the talent of one of the most successful pilots in history. And the most alarming thing is that, for now, Hamilton's fight does not have a definite end. Because it is not a poorly taken curve or an error in boxes. It is something much deeper. It is the symptom of a fractured relationship between the pilot and his machine. A relationship that, if not repaired soon, could negatively define the entire Hamilton stage in Ferrari. As the championship progresses and the circuits continue to expose both the virtues and weaknesses of each team, Ferrari faces a critical crossroads. What happened in the Canada classification cannot be treated as an isolated episode or make up as a decent result. It is a warning sign for Maranello, and also an uncomfortable statement for Hamilton himself. The project to which he has opted the last stage of his career is at risk of not offering the machinery or the competitive environment he needs to fight for an 8th world title. The immediate future is dyed of uncertainty. Ferrari has opted in 2025 for an evolution of SF-24, a car that already showed technical limitations in the previous season. The SF-25 should be the synthesis of those learned lessons, a more balanced chassis, less sensitive to the lateral wind, and with a more predictable aerodynamic platform. However, what has reached the track is an inconsistent car, which responds differently with each change in conditions and that forces its pilots to work more in adaptation than in performance. This instability is especially harmful in a Formula One where the differences between glory and oblivion are measured in hundreds. Hamilton is used to operating under pressure, but the situation in Ferrari is different from any other stage of his career. It is no longer about maximizing a dominant car like W11 or leading a development process from a solid base. Here he meets a structure that, although powerful in reputation, lacks that same operational solidity. Ferrari still has slow reaction times in the face of problems. Aerodynamic improvements are late or do not achieve the expected impact. The correlation between wind and track tunnel remains inconsistent. All this affects the morale of the team and even more the confidence of a pilot like Hamilton, who has built his success on the ability to find tents where others only see limits. The coming fracture is not just technique. It is also emotional and symbolic. When Hamilton arrived in Ferrari, the narrative was clear. A hungry, consecrated champion of closing his career with a historical feat, but that story needs tangible progress chapters. If what follows after Canada is more weekends where Hamilton is forced to fight to survive instead of competing for victories, that narrative can disintegrate. And in that scenario, the possibility of a fracture between pilot and equipment ceases to be hypothetical and begins to seem inevitable. Internally, the team faces increasing tension. The comparison with Leclerc, who has lived more time with the structure and knows how to extract the best to the car, even in his worst days he adds pressure to Hamilton. In a sport where perception is everything, staying behind your teammate feeds rumors, fracture the internal narrative and weakens the political position of the team within the team. While Charles has not been much better in terms of global results, his body language, his link with engineers and their ability to adapt to SF-25 position it as another figure in control, more settled. That difference, although subtle, can mark the strategic course that Ferrari decides to take in the short term. What happened in the classification of the Canada 2025 Grand Prix is not just one more anecdote within a season under construction. It is a forceful demonstration that the project between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari, so loaded with symbolism and expectation, already faces in its early stages its first great structural crisis. Because when details are analyzed honestly, what remains is not a hopeful image of progress, but a disturbing portrait of contained frustration, wasted talent and opportunities that evaporate before even consolidating. Hamilton did not simply compete for Ferrari. He came to rewrite the story. In a team whose narrative is full of myths, tragedies and redemptions, the presence of a world heptacampion should be the final catalyst to return to the top. But what has been found is an environment that still fails to articulate a competitive car regularly, A work system that seems not to have completely internalized the lessons of the past, and a car that more than a victory tool has become an obstacle that defies its adaptation capacity. This situation goes beyond the cold data of the classification. It is not just that Hamilton is 6/10 of the pole, or that it has ended in the 5th position. It is the context. These are the expectations charged every second that passes behind the SF-25 steering wheel. This is how a pilot accustomed to looking for the limit is now managing a car that responds erratically, which does not allow him to attack with confidence, that requires containment when his nature was always that of the aggressive, bold pilot, which rises under pressure. Beyond the results, the great lesson of the Canada GP is clear. Names and symbols alone do not win championships. Structure, coherence, technique, and vision are needed. A car is needed that responds to what an elite talent as Hamilton demands. Without that, the risk is not just losing races. It is losing the pilot who could have taken Ferrari back to glory.